And the consequence for the human realm of the wild coming too close is an ongoing disaster for the human realm. Even though the prayers and the North Face outfits all weep in the direction of more access to the wild. But the wild is where it is and not with us, architecturally speaking and mythically speaking, for very clear reasons, that we cannot bear direct access to anything that is fundamentally not human.
You know, it echoes something that hit me about a month ago. I was here and I saw a number of sort of protests that were happening around vaccinations, you know, and it was happening in the street. And what dawned on me was, wow, it's our generation's responsibility to ask, what does it mean to actually be in a participatory democracy? How do we talk about these things? What is actually collective responsibility? What are the consequences of the decisions that we make now? All these things that we felt were sort of done in the past or maybe inherited. And what you're making me question is, was it actually done in the previous generation? I don't know. I mean, you had the League of Nations, you had the creation of nation states and the United Nations. And there was some effort after the First and Second World War, to say, okay, how do we have responsibility towards each other in humanity? What does it mean to progress as a human species? How do we understand humanitarianism and act for the good of all? Our generation has been almost siloed, it feels, from having to bear the weight of that kind of questioning and responsibility and enact it because we've inherited something that we just assumed would work for us. And now that it's not, we're like, hey, what the fuck do we do? We don't actually know.
Which is not seeming to spare anyone from high reactivity and lunging off in, you know, what did Monty Python call it? Rushing madly off in all directions, something of that kind. In other words, it's really important for us all to acknowledge that the lack of certainty does not introduce a willingness to slow one's pace. It tends, in a time that's addicted to mastery, to accelerate one's pace instead.
Because it's driven by fear, and I guess uncertainty underneath it is fear.
Well, and underneath the fear is the allegation that you're supposed to live and have available to you a life dictated to you by a user-friendly sequence of certainties. See, this is what the addiction to mastery and competence and control weeps out over the countryside. That you're supposed to know, and then factor in this eccentric tirade of information, this allegation that you have things available to you as a consequence of being utterly overrun by being led in on things you can do nothing about.
Yes,
that's not what information is. That's a kind of propagandization of your capacity to give a shit.
Yes,
and giving a shit is a very early casualty of hearing too much about things that you have no agency in or participatory consequence in. Right? So all you can do then is shoulder a sense of inevitable consequence and a vague sense that you have been derelict of duty and as such guilty as uncharged because it's getting worse. Kind of thing. This amorphous sense that you're fundamentally wrong and there's something fundamentally wrong with you certainly has a biblical root in terms of the West. There's no question. Original sin, etc., and so on. The primordial story is a story of trespass. And it's playing itself out again, right? And in the old days of the pandemic, isn't that a strange phrase already? In the old days of the pandemic, there was a lot of talk about where it came from. You remember there's two competing, often contending ideas. One of them from the wet market in that Wuhan, I think is the name of the place. And the other one was people were monkeying around with the chromosomes, right, in the old chemical warehouses and something broke loose or whatever it was. Either way, if you're a storyteller, you tell it something like this. Well, as can happen from time to time, the membrane that properly set off the wild from the human domain grew uncertain grew thin and threadbare and became porous. And the consequence for the human realm of the wild coming too close is an ongoing disaster for the human realm. Even though the prayers and the North Face outfits all weep in the direction of more access to the wild. But the wild is where it is and not with us, architecturally speaking and mythically speaking, for very clear reasons, that we cannot bear direct access to anything that is fundamentally not human. We're no good at it. And one of the early indications of that is our attempt to reconfigure every not human thing in anthropocentric terms, to make them available to us, understandable to us. P.S. So we have all the northern peoples, and other peoples have the notion, the myth too, but people who look like me in this world ancestrally have this idea, which is typically called the world tree, right? And the notion unexamined about the world tree is it's somehow establishing a mode of connectivity between the human realm and the godly realm, right? Above and below. You know, you can see the obvious architecture and the fact that it's a living thing and it's a tree and it's very user-friendly for the 21st century, and totally misapprehended as a mythic construct and as a story of real consequence. The purpose of the world tree is not to establish, reestablish, or safeguard the connectivity between the terrestrial realm and the godly realm, between the humans and the gods. The purpose of the tree is to keep them separate. It's holding the sky, if you will, for the sake of the humans. Because whoever put the whole arrangement together knew full well that too much reality undoes the human first. And the amazing thing is that the reverse is not true. In other words, too many humans obliges the wild to bend away from us and to wait it out. And of course, the wild won't reconstitute itself as it was before the humans, but people, we can all imagine a time that the wild can somehow reconstitute itself as it does in a fallow field, for example, after X number of years. But the reverse ability is not there. So this is not just concentric circles of consequence. There's some fundamental compassion built into the arrangement that keeps us one step removed from the gods, that we could not bear looking into God's face. It's questionable whether our humanity would survive the encounter.